Hey you guys, my name's Jason and today I'm going to be taking you through a really cool tutorial on how to create a simple character in Photoshop. Now you can use this for an animation, you can use it for a game. This is just a quick tutorial on how to create a quick character. Now I haven't planned any of this out at all, and so this is going to be very improvised. So let's go ahead and jump right in. This should be really fun. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. So you can see here I already have a character that I've sketched out, and you'll notice that it's made out of super simple shapes. I've only created it out of basically ovals and circles, and so that's the key. When you create your character, you want to make sure that you really pay attention to the shapes of your character and how they play off of each other. That's probably the number one most important part when it comes to character design, are the simple shapes that your character is made out of. Now let's go ahead and start building this actual character. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to use my shape tool, which is right over here on the left side of the screen, and I'm going to make sure that my fill is set to a dark bluish gray. So I already have it set about where I want it. It might be a little bit darker, and then we'll go ahead and hit OK. And then we're going to set our stroke to off, and we just do that by hitting this white box with a slash through it. So now that's going to give us a solid shape once we click and drag, and that gives us a solid shape with that dark gray color. The next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and use our transform tool, which for those of you that don't know, it's going to be Control T or Command T if you're on a Mac, and that's going to bring up your transform tool. This allows you to shrink your shape down and also allows you to rotate it. So what we want to do is we want to rotate it into the correct angle, and then we want to shrink it down so it fits about where the sketch is, where the body is. So about there should be good. We'll hit enter. Yes. And then we're going to go ahead and copy this layer by hitting Control J or Command J if you're on a Mac. And now you see over here in our layers panel, we just got a copy of that. Then we can go ahead and drag that up like so. And the head is going to be rotated just a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate it like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and shrink it down so that it fits. I'll shrink it down to about there. Then we'll hit OK. Perfect. Next, we want to go ahead and create those ears. So the way I'm going to create them is first I'm going to grab my shape tool again, and I'm going to create a long skinny oval like so. And I'm going to click and drag that back into the document. Next, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my transform tool, and then I'm going to rotate that to about the angle that this ear is at, and then I'm going to right click it, and then I'm going to come down to warp. Now what this is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to warp the shape of my selection. So I want to try to warp this into the same shape that I have there for the ear. So about there should be close enough. We'll go ahead and hit enter. Yes. And then I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down to about that size. Should be good. We can drag it into place to check it, and then we want to rotate it to make sure that it fits into place. So about there should be good. Then I'm going to go ahead and copy this layer, and then I'm going to drag this new layer over like so. And then I'm going to use my transform tool and then right click and then flip horizontal. So now we get the same ear but in the other direction. And then I'm going to go ahead and rotate that, and I'm going to shrink this one down just a little bit since it's further back than the other ear. And I'll go ahead and place that right there. Then I could go ahead and select both of these shape layers, and I'll right click, and then I'm going to come to merge shapes. So now those are both one shape on the same layer. The next thing I want to do is I want to work on those arms. So I'm going to do the same thing once again. I'm going to create a shape with my shape tool, and it's going to be a pretty skinny oval. And then I'm going to go ahead and drag that down further, and then I'm going to use my transform tool to warp it. So I'll right click and come to warp, and I just want to try to replicate this arm right here, or leg. So it's a little bit fatter down at the bottom, so I can click about in the middle and push it down like so to get a fatter bottom. And then I can pull it in from the top like so. And I might stretch it a little bit more up here. And I might flatten the bottom just a little bit by pulling this up. So something like that should work. We'll go ahead and hit enter. And now we want to get that nice curve in there. So now that we've already transformed it once, we can go ahead and hit Control T again, and then right click and warp once again. And this time we're going to warp it to put that curve in there. So I'll warp it to about there. It's looking a little bit too skinny. So I'm going to pull that back out, pull this over more. I think something about like this should do. So we'll go ahead and hit enter. And then I'm going to go ahead and shrink that down. And then I'm going to drag it over and rotate it until it fits on top of our sketch. Now it looks like it needs to be a little bit larger, so maybe about there. Then we'll hit enter. And then we're going to go ahead and also copy this layer. And I'm going to drag this one over to here and then right click, and then come to my transform tool and then flip it horizontal, just like we did with the ear. And then we can go ahead and rotate that so it fits over our sketch also. And this back leg is going to be a little bit smaller too, so we'll shrink it back down to about there, hit enter. And then we want to get this back leg. The fourth leg is kind of being covered up over here, so we're not going to worry about that, just to keep it simplified. The simpler, the better. So let's go ahead and copy this layer once again, and we want to make sure we're on the original one so we get this larger leg. So we'll copy that, and then we're going to go ahead and drag that over here, and then we'll rotate. So I'm going to rotate it to about there, and something like that should be good. We'll go ahead and hit enter. Perfect. So now we have the basic shape of our animal. Next, what we want to do is we want to start adding some detail. So what we're going to do first is we're first going to make sure we have these all in the right order. So this back leg and this back leg here, they need to be behind this oval. So we need to select both of those, and then we need to drag them down so they're the very bottom layer. Same with these ears. So the layer that has my ears on them, that one right there, we need to drag those down behind everything else too. And then everything else should be in the correct position. The reason why we did this is because we're about to add some shading and highlights to this, and everything needs to be in the correct position. Otherwise, it's going to look like his back leg is in front of his body. So let's go ahead and start doing that. So the way we're going to do this is first, let's start with the front leg. So I'm going to add a new layer above this, and then I'm going to right click that layer and create a clipping mask. So now we have a clipping mask for the shape of his front leg. This means anything we paint on this layer will not leave the shape of his front leg. So let me show you what I mean. If I go ahead and select this dark gray here, and then I'm going to grab a little bit lighter version of that for highlight color, and maybe a little bit more towards this side of the blues. You're not going to notice it too much, but subconsciously you'll pick it up just a tiny bit. So then I'm going to go ahead and use my brush, and I want to make sure that I'm on a soft edged brush. So I'm going to come into my brushes and then select the soft edge, and then I can go ahead and start painting in that highlight. So the highlight is going to be coming from the top. That will be our light source, and so it's going to hit the top part of our leg. So I'm going to add it in about there. And I don't really want the highlight too high up on his leg, so I can go ahead and use my erase tool and also make sure I'm on a soft edged brush. And I can go ahead and erase this away. I'm going to put my brush opacity at 20%, and I do that by hitting the number 2 on my keyboard, and then I can slowly start erasing this away until I get it to the point that I want it. So something like that should work. Next, let's go ahead and do this for all of our layers. So our next layer is going to be his head. So I'm going to add a new layer above that, and then I'm going to right click it and create a clipping layer mask. And then I'll go ahead and add that highlight in. So like I said, the light source is from the top, so we're going to add this to the top part of the head. So something like that should work. And then we can move on to our next layer. Our next layer is the body. So I'm going to add a new layer above that, right click, create clipping mask, and then I'm going to go ahead and paint a highlight on his back like so. Then next, let's go ahead and move on to his ears. So I'm going to come down to his ear layer, and I'll create a new layer above that, right click, create clipping mask, and then I'm going to go ahead and add the highlight on top of his ears. So I'll add a highlight there, and then I'll add a highlight on this side as well. Perfect. Now lastly, let's go ahead and add him to his back leg. So I'll add a new layer above this layer, right click, create clipping layer mask, and it's just the same thing like we've been doing this whole time. And I think that's the wrong leg, so I'm going to come over to this leg. That's the correct one. And I'm going to put this just right along this edge here. I don't want too much highlight because it's his back leg, and I don't want it to stand out too much. And then I'm going to come over to our back leg layer, and I'll add a new layer above that. Right click, create clipping layer mask, and we'll just do the same thing once again. And we only want to add it just a little bit to this top area. Perfect. All right, so now we have the really simple highlights on our character. The next thing we want to do is we want to start adding in some facial features and detail onto our character. Now, I want my character to be sort of a magical character that has a glowing effect to him. So we're going to start off with the eyes. So the way we're going to create the eyes is we're going to create them completely separate from everything else first. So then I'll go ahead and create my eye. Now I'm going to hold down shift to create a perfect circle while I'm doing this. And so once I get it to about that size, it's up to you what size you want to create it. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my fill and then turn my stroke back on with the color white. And then I want to change the size of the stroke from 10 pixels to, let's try 30 pixels, see how that looks. I think that'll work. Maybe we can try 35 and see how that looks. I think that looks a little bit better. So let's go with that. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this layer, and then using my transform tool, I'm going to go ahead and shrink that down, and I'm going to hold down Shift and Alt at the same time, so that way it shrinks from the center and it shrinks in proportion. So I'm going to shrink it to about there. And why I want to do this is because I'm trying to have that stroke applied to this circle, so it just creates a solid looking circle. So I'll go ahead and hit enter and see how that looks. Alright, so the stroke doesn't fill it in all the way, so all we have to do is just come into our fill and fill that in with our white, and we need to make sure that it's on. So now that's filled in. Perfect. So now we have our eye. Now what we can do is we can still enlarge this if it's not large enough for you. So it's not large enough for me, so I'm going to bring it up to about there. Perfect. Next, let's go ahead and merge these two layers together. Now before we do that, we have to rasterize them. Otherwise, they're going to merge together and this whole thing is going to get filled in since one of them has the fill applied to it. So I'm going to go ahead and right click, and then I'm going to come up to rasterize layer. So now that's a rasterized layer. And that means that it's no longer a vector shape like my other circle. But now if I select both those layers and then I right click, I can merge both those layers and they both become rasterized. So now we can go ahead and we can shrink this layer down. So I'm going to shrink it down to about that size. I want his eyes to be pretty large and take up most of his head. It's still a little bit too large, so I'll shrink it down to about that size. And then I'll go ahead and hit enter. The next thing I want to do is I want to add that glow effect to the eye. So I'm going to come to effects at the bottom of my layers panel, and then I'm going to come to outer glow. And what I want to do is I want to set an outer glow to this. So as you can see now, it's got a really cool outer glow to it, but I want to change the color of it. So I'm going to change it to more of a aquatic blue. So maybe about there. Then we can hit OK. And then we can play with the opacity. So we can make it brighter if we want, or we can make it we can make it completely transparent. I'm going to bring it to about 40% for now. And then we can play with the speed, which is just how hard the edge of that glow is. So I'm going to bring that all the way down to 3%, and then we can play with that size also. Now, I think I want my size to be a little bit smaller, so I have it at 21 pixels right now. And then I'm going to bring up my speed, a little bit more down. So now my speed is set to 0%, my size is set to 21%, and my opacity is set to 40%. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Next, I'm going to go ahead and copy this layer. And if you've already forgot, it's Control-J to copy that layer, or Command-J if you're on a Mac. And then you're going to be able to drag that other copy over like so. Now that I'm looking at his large eyes, I think they look a little bit too big. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that and undo the copying of that layer. And then I'm going to shrink this layer down, and I'll shrink it down to, let's say, about that size. So maybe about 2/3 of what it was before. And I'm also going to drag that more over to the other side of his head. And then I'm going to go ahead and recopy that layer, and then I'll drag that copy over to the other side of his head. And I'm liking that a lot more. Perfect. All right, the next thing we want to do is we want to add some more detail. So first off, I'm going to add some detail on his arms. So I'm going to create a new layer above this. And on this layer, I'm going to do the same thing that I did with his eyes, except I'm going to create a circle. So I'm going to come into my whites, and then I'm going to switch over to my brush tool, and using a hard-edged brush, I'm just going to go ahead and paint in a circle because that will be much, much easier. So I'm going to paint it in just like so, and I have my brush opacity set to 20%, so I need to bring that up to 100%, and there we go. Now we have the full opacity of our brush. So now we have that little detail on his arm, and what we want to do now is we want to add in the effect. So we're going to come down to effects, and then we're going to come to outer glow, and we already have our settings set up the way we want it because we already did it on the eyes, so we can go ahead and hit OK. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go in there and we're going to want to warp this. Because it's going around the curvature of his leg, we need to have a little bit more warp to our circle. So I'm going to hit Control-T, and then I'm going to come to warp, and then I want to just warp a little bit more of a curve into this. So the way we do that is just by pulling up this bottom part and pulling up this top part, and maybe we can even pull down this corner a little bit more. And maybe pull this corner more over to that side, and I'll pull that bottom part up just a little bit more. And so now that's going to give it some more perspective. We can go ahead and hit enter. Let's see how that looks. All right, not too shabby. Now let's go ahead and copy this layer. So we're going to go Control J, and then I'm going to drag this over to the other arm, and then I'm going to go ahead and rotate it like so. And now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and cut this off where it's going over the arm. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and zoom in there, and using our erase tool, we're going to go ahead and erase it out by hand. The reason why we're doing it like this rather than making it into a clipping layer mask for our arm layer is because we still want this blue outer glow to be coming out of the shape of his arm. And if we put it as a clipping layer mask, it's going to clip off all this glow that's coming off out here. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for our other shape. So I'm going to come over here. And another thing we can actually do to make this a lot quicker is we can come down to our layer that has our leg on it. So I think this guy is right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control or Command on my keyboard, and I can select the thumbnail on that layer. And you'll see it makes a nice quick selection of everything on that layer. Now what I have to do is I have to invert the selection, so I'll hit Control-Shift-I or Command-Shift-I if you're on a Mac. And so now rather than selecting everything inside of this shape, it's inverted that so it's selecting everything on the outside. And then you want to make sure that you're on your layer that has this glowing shape on it, so I think it's this one right here. And then you're going to go ahead and hit Delete. And now you see that cuts off that shape right there. But yet we still get that glow coming out of that side. All right, perfect. So now we have that detail on his arms. The next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and add some detail to his back. So I'm going to create a new layer, and then using my brush tool, I'm going to go ahead and create the design that I want on his back. Now I kind of want a square with rounded edges on his back, so I'm just going to draw this out just like so. So I'll come here and try to get as best of a curve in there as possible. So maybe like that, and then we'll have this line come over like that. And then this one will come back like that. It's still not good enough curve, so I'm going to keep trying to get that curve in there till I like the way it's curving. All right, much better. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more perspective in there by thinning these lines out as I get to the top. So the way I'll do that is by using my transform tool. Then I'm going to right click and then come to warp. And then I want to go ahead and warp that down so it kind of squashes the lines towards the top of his back. So they just need to get a little bit thinner as they get to the top, and that way it's going to look like it's in correct perspective. So something like that should work. Then I'll go ahead and hit OK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do like I did before. I'm going to add the outer glow. Go ahead and hit OK. And then I'm going to select the shape of my body. So I think it's this layer right here. Nope, it's this one right here. So I'll right click. I'll hold Control or Command, and I'll select that thumbnail on that layer to select my shape. And then I'll come back up to this layer, and then I'll hit Control-Shift-I or Command-Shift-I if you're on a Mac to invert that selection, and then we can hit Delete, and now we don't have any of that coming out of there. Perfect. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and add a little bit of a glowing design to his ears also. So I'm just going to zoom in there, and I'm going to add a new layer above this, and I'll do the same thing once again. Using my brush tool and the color white, I'm going to go ahead and paint in there the designs I want. So I think I want 2 stripes coming across like so, and I want to get those as rounded as possible. And then I'm going to go ahead and add those to the other side also. So we'll add one right there, and then we'll add one right there. Perfect. Next, let's go ahead and add in that outer glow. Hit OK. Next, we're going to go ahead and find that ear layer. So I think it's one of these down here. And once we find it, we can go ahead and select it. And then we're going to invert the selection. And then we'll go ahead and come back up to our layer that has the glowing stripes on it. And we're going to go ahead and hit Delete. Perfect. All right, this is looking pretty cool. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit of detail to the background so it doesn't look so plain and bland. So I'm going to first off darken my background a little bit. So if I come down to my gray background layer, I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-U, and that's going to bring up my hue and saturation panel. And from here, I can go ahead and darken my background quite a bit. So I can bring it all the way down to black if I wanted to, but I don't want it quite that dark. So I'm going to bring it down to about there. We still want our character to stand out, and so we still want that contrast between our background and our character. Next, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And now what we want to do is we want to add a little bit more of a highlight in the center. So I'm going to do that by first adding a new layer so we can adjust this layer. And then using my brush tool and making sure that I'm on a soft edged brush. And then I'm going to bring my size up. I'm going to go ahead and paint in a large spot like so. And that might be a little bit too large, so I'll bring my brush size down, and then I'll paint another one like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring down the opacity on this layer so it's not so bright, but we want it bright enough that you can tell the difference between the center color and the outside color. So about there should work. And I think that all works. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge these two layers together so our background is one solid piece. And then I'm going to bring the darkness down once more because it's not looking dark enough for me. So I brought up my hue and saturation panel again, and I'm going to drag it down to about there, and then we'll hit OK. A lot of creating art is about making adjustments. Now I want to go ahead and add a shadow down there at the bottom so that my character looks like he's actually grounded. So I'm going to come over to my black color, and then doing the same thing again with my brush tool using a soft edge brush, and make sure you add a new layer. So you don't do this on your background layer. You're going to go ahead and click right in the center, and then using your transform tool, you can go ahead and shrink that down. And what we want to do is we want to squash it like so, and that'll make a nice shadow for our character. We can pull it out in that direction also, maybe bring it up just a tiny bit. Then we'll hit OK, and then we can go ahead and drag that underneath our character like so. Now, lastly, I want to go ahead and add some tiny little glowing orbs out here. So the way I can do that is I can just come up to one of these layers, like let's say my ear stripe layer. And if I paint anything on this layer, it's going to automatically add that glowing effect. Now, if you want, you can add this to a new layer and then add the glowing effect. I just find this much quicker. So all I'll do is using the color white and a soft edged brush, I'm going to go ahead and add a spot like so, and another one like so. Now, it's not showing up very well, the glow, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to undo this, and then I'm going to add a new layer above this so I can actually adjust the glow on my orbs. So I'm going to add one right there, and I'll add another one right there, and I'll just add these in a few random spots. We can even add one in front of our character. We can add one out here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my effects, add an outer glow, and what I want to do in this case is I want to bring up the opacity so we can see that outer glow a lot more. So about there should be good. We'll hit OK. Perfect. Lastly, let's go ahead and turn off our background sketch layer. So I'm going to come down to my sketch layer, which is this guy right here. And I actually want to keep these little spots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this layer so I have a backup with my sketch, and then I can turn off my first layer that has a sketch on it. On my second one that I just made a copy of, I'm going to use my erase tool, and I'm going to go ahead and just erase away everywhere that my sketch is except for these little dots out here because I really like the way they look, and I think it adds more of an interesting sort of look to my piece of artwork. So I'm going to leave those there. All right, cool. Now real quick, before we end, I'm noticing that that shadow isn't making it all the way out to this leg. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to that shadow layer, and using my transform tool, I can go ahead and extend that all the way out. And I can extend it all the way out in the other direction also. And I'm just going to keep doing that until I get it making the full stretch. I'll hit enter. Perfect. And then I can push that up a little bit more also. Cool. I think our character looks pretty good. Thanks for joining me in this tutorial, and I really hope you learned something from it. I hope you walk away with something valuable and you're able to apply some of this stuff to your own artwork or your own game designs. Thanks for watching. My name's Jason, and have a great life. If you like this tutorial, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll be sending you many more videos just like this one.